please welcome the incredible Kris Carr.
Renee, so good to be with you, my friend.
I know. We met, I was calculating this 9 months ago. And it's funny how we go through these things in our heads. I'm like, I could have had a baby by now. Gonna birth a baby in 9 months. Yeah. We met at Stu and Amy McLaren's incredible mastermind.
So
and
fun.
I refer to this mastermind a lot on my show because talk about walking into a room, super brilliant people, and me just not thinking that I belonged there. And that you guys, none of you ever made me feel like I didn't.
And it's because you're a super brilliant person too.
It was such an honor to be there. And
I remember, it's interesting because I'm sorry to cut you off, but like every single one of us walks into rooms like that we deserve to be in, and we think we don't deserve to be in them. And then we get into the room and we're like, oh my God, this room is kind of normal. Like, yeah, there's some smart people here, but I'm smart too. And we're just all people and we all poop.
I know. We do all poop. And some of us do a better job at that. Yes. No, but I just remember, I mean, you were so gracious. Near the end, I think we were like kind of saying our goodbyes at the end of the day before going to the recording at the studio, and nestling myself between you and Danielle Laporte. And I was like, wow, I can be healed right here in this moment between you two ladies. And oh gosh, you guys are amazing. But yeah, that room was incredible. You're incredible. So let's talk about you. You are almost 1 year post pub on your book.
Yes.
Tell us about your book and how that's going.
Well, this is my 7th book, and this is probably one of my most potent and powerful books. So for people who don't know me, I have been in the health and wellness world for 20 years, and I hadn't planned to be in that world. I had a very different job, very different career, very different ambitions. And then 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with an incurable stage 4 cancer. And so I've been living with incurable stage 4 cancer for over 2 decades, well past my expiration point. And as a newly diagnosed cancer patient and a young woman in her early 30s, I was like, what the heck do I do now? Where do I start? How do I build a plan? How do I learn how to take care of myself in between all these crazy doctor's appointments? And that really just ignited a fire and a passion in me to actually learn this stuff, but also to share it, because I felt like I wasn't probably the only person out there who comes up against a really difficult time in life and finds that they are kind of clueless and like skillless. And so I started writing. I made a documentary film. I sold it to the Discovery Channel. And then there was just like this outpouring of media because I called it something different. Even though everybody said, don't call it that. Like, you know, the people who are like, oh, you can't do that. Stay inside the box. I called it crazy, sexy cancer. And that sort of ignited a firestorm and of goodness. And so I've been writing and creating and coaching and helping people who are patients and people who don't want to be patients for 2 decades now, in addition to caring for my own health. And it was around the time of the pandemic when my father, my chosen father, because he adopted me, was dying of stage 4 cancer. My business is struggling because I was really pulling back and I hadn't really life-proofed my business. And here we are going through a really unprecedented time with the pandemic. Everything's shut down. We're all isolated, so forth, so on. And my publishers were like, hey, it's been a bit. It's time to write another book. What do you want to write about? I want to write about something hopeful, big, manifesting, like, hey, go girl. And I was like, no, I want to write about grief and loss and the big messy emotions that happen when life falls apart, because I can't do anything else but what I'm doing now. And I'm in the thick of it. And I imagine that I'm not the only person in the thick of it. And so I wrote this book called I'm Not a Mourning Person, Mourning with a U. And it really is like, it's part memoir, but it's also a field guide to some of the things that will happen when life kicks you in the teeth, when the rug gets pulled out from under you, when you feel like, you're in the middle of a big setback and you have no idea how you're going to come back. You don't even know if it's possible. And it's just been a really beautiful journey, because I think that people have a hard time thawing around and welcoming in some of these richer, deeper, more painful conversations. But on the other side of those conversations is so much of our freedom, our peace, our joy, our contentment, and our alignment. And so it's just been beautiful to be a part of that conversation and to do my part in normalizing it.
I love it. My friend Dan Go shared a brilliant post months ago about some things he needs to get better at as he ages. And I think him and I are the same age. And it's like exercise, sleep, like all the things you know. And there was one on there that just hit home. And he said, I need to become better at grieving, knowing that as he gets older, more people he loves, he's going to lose. We all are going to lose. And it is something we don't talk about. And it is something we don't necessarily know how to practice, because It's not an emotion we have until we're in it. And then what? You're like, where are the tools to deal with this? So this is something that you're bringing forth.
Yeah. And when we talk about grief and loss, we deal with it every day in different ways. It can be the loss of a person, but it could also be, like, for me, when I was newly diagnosed, it was the loss of my former sense of self, who I thought I was going to be. It could be loss of a friendship. It could be a loss of a sense of confidence because you just had a really big wipeout in your life for whatever reason, divorce, a job setback, and you just feel really shaky, like you can't do it anymore. And so the thing about grief is, because I think we live in this grief-phobic, as I've been saying, messy emotions averse society, especially if you look at Instagram, everything's polished and curated, right? And so few of us have those tools. And from a biological standpoint, we're wired to be pack animals, creatures, be in community. And so anything that makes us feel vulnerable to being rejected from the community is something we're going to avoid, right? And standing out of feeling vulnerable, feeling sad can kind of activate this very primitive sense in us that we will be abandoned, that we no longer fit in. So we have to go along to get along, right? And then we start to alter our personalities and we alter our sense of selves and our identities so that we will fit in. But that only works for so long before we start to have health issues, emotional issues, mental health issues, because we're not meant to fit in. We're meant to shine as our authentic selves. And so I think that a lot of this work is not only heart healing or heart tending, as I like to call it, but also really emboldening, because it allows you to become more of the person that you're here to be.
Oh, yeah. And so going back to this song that we were talking about earlier, before we recorded, about going on a bear hunt, how we avoid facing the difficult things because we want to find the easier way. And sometimes the easier way is the harder way. It ends up being the harder way because it's the longer way. And you just got to go through the thick of it. So why do you think that we have this natural tendency to avoid just feeling those emotions?
For everything I just said, because, we don't have a lot of models for this. And we really fear, I think, that rejection of being that person who's standing out in fear and pain. Because a lot of us don't know how to talk to people who are in pain, right? So what do? We avoid them. Or we say weird because we don't know what to say. And there's no shame in that, although you might feel shame. I've put my foot in my mouth many times. And it wasn't until I was writing this book and actually doing an enormous amount of research on grief, loss, anger, shame, guilt, all of these, as I would call them, messy emotions, that I started to connect the dots more for myself. Like I said, I've been in health and wellness for over 2 decades. And I feel like it wasn't until this most recent rupture, as I would call it in the book, that I started to realize that there was a hole in my education because there was my own internal resistance to some of these topics. And so to go a little bit further with your question, I also think that the physical manifestation of the messy emotions is a spike of cortisol or stress hormones. So that sends us into the fight, flight, freeze, or most recently discovered fawn response.
Ooh, okay.
Right. And so when we are in fight or flight, obviously those stress hormones are coursing through our bodies and we are ready for whatever the battle is going to be. It's not a battle though. We're sad. Right. So it's just like this awareness of saying, oh, wow, no wonder I don't want to experience these things. I'm getting that flood of stress. This is normal, natural, but I am aware, I'm conscious. I have tools that I've developed for years. Whether I choose to use them or not is another story, right? But I can help my nervous system come back online so that I can better navigate this time in business, this time in my relationship, this time in my health and well-being.
So tell us about the fawn response.
The fawn response, I mean, I don't know if you've ever done it, but I certainly have. So I'm very familiar with fight. I'm very familiar with flight. I'm very familiar with freeze. But it wasn't until I was, again, researching this book that I was like, oh yeah, fawn. You know, when you want to be liked, when you want to be accepted, when you want to be cool, and you just shower praise on the person or you fawn all over the person because you want to be in their good graces. But oftentimes you might not even feel that. It's coming from a place of fear and anxiety and wanting to fit in. And so it's not authentic. And that person feels it too, right? There's just a lot of ways that we kind of lose our minds when we're going through a rough patch. And again, no shame, normal. Yeah. But we can start to bring more awareness and more tools to our heart tending so that we have better health, happiness, and relationships.
So I was speaking with my spiritual therapist a couple weeks ago. I love working with her because when I show up to our chats, it's like whatever's on my mind, it's the issue that we're going to discuss. Well, last discussion was off the heels of us unfortunately losing a dear friend who was a man who was 45 years old, seemingly healthy. A year prior, we had another friend who passed away, and they just kind of killed over. They were both on vacation when this happened. And so I asked my therapist, is this common that people die on vacation? And she said, yeah, because we're operating in the fight or flight or freeze or fawn mode for so long that our body is alive because of all of those cortisol, the adrenaline that's running through the body. And then when they finally relax, that's when things kind of hits the fan.
Yeah.
And it's a gentle reminder that why are we doing this to ourselves? And who for? It is killing us. You see this? I assume you see this with friends, with family, people you probably work with.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, all of this is a big conversation in my wellness community too, because so I teach what I call the 5 pillars of wellness, and they're really the basis of lifestyle medicine. And it's about nurturing what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're thinking, which of course is the hardest one, and how you're resting and renewing. And those pillars rest on a foundation of stress management, right? Because stress is the number one killer. And so, of course, when we're having these conversations, really the goal here is to better equip us, people listening, just reminding ourselves that when we are in that fight or flight, we have that ability to switch back into rest and digest. And if we're in prolonged fight or flight, that's what leads to chronic inflammation, And that's what leads to our bodies starting to break down. Now, whether they break down in one fell swoop on vacation or they're breaking down over time from chronic illness. And it's not to say that our genes don't have a part, but epigenetics also teaches us that our genes are not our destiny. And we get to impact our genes by the choices that we make. And those choices are physical choices. But as I am sharing in this most recent book, they're also emotional choices. You know, I spent the first half of my career focused on what you're eating and helping you optimize that. And I feel like where I am right now is really focusing on addressing what's eating you. And that's the combination that makes up holistic whole person care.
What is eating you? That's so good. Okay, so listeners are like versions of us. So female entrepreneurs, there are some parents. And I don't think we ever looked at grief and mourning outside of losing somebody we've loved. And it's so thick. And now when I reflect back on running my businesses, it was like the toughest parts where you were grieving something terrible that happened in business.
Yeah.
For instance, having to lay off half my team.
Yeah.
And for me, the grief happened the months prior going into that, knowing that that decision was made. And I had to let these people go whom I loved and cared about. And they're still alive. They're happy. They're thriving today. But wow, I could have used these tools going into those moments. This was during the pantsuit nation thing with the elections that were happening. So there was like this movement of women not wearing makeup and going to work and all this stuff. So I was just beside myself crying every night before bed. I couldn't even sleep knowing that in a month, in 2 weeks, in 2 hours, I'm going to have to go in and lay off these people. And I live with a man who's very stern. You're kind of like allowed your emotions, but also there's an expiration date when you're allowed to. Do you know what I mean? Like Tuesday at noon, stop talking about this. And I just didn't know how to deal with this because I was embarrassed that first of all, it had to happen.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed in myself that I had to go through with this. And then I was worried about these people's livelihood. These are adults, mature, responsible adults. They're going to be fine. I put a lot of pressure on myself to get through this. Never thought of this as something I had to go through, but in terms of mourning and grieving.
I think it's a great example. And, you know, we can use a different word if the word grief is triggery for people, because I think it really is. But, you know, there's like a repair that needs to happen when a rupture takes place. And the rupture really is that moment when everything changes. The thing that you have been creating and loving and nurturing in a business is it's like a baby. It's a person, and it's ever changing and ever growing, and the needs are ever changing and ever growing. I think it's the bravest thing that anybody can do to start a business. I do not take it lightly. It is not for the faint of heart. I don't even recommend it for a lot of people, quite honestly. But when you are in and this is what your calling is, and this is what you want, this is your passion, your dream, it's amazing. And so, but when there are those moments, I've had similar experiences like that. I think it is an opportunity to just be really kind to yourself, because what comes up is not just the moment of like letting them go and all of the pain around that, but all these things have tentacles to our past, tentacles to other experiences, especially if they're really painful, that are coming up for tending. You know, when one thing happens in our life, there's often a domino effect. This domino effect of change and opportunity and possibility, but it doesn't feel like it at that time. So for me, in times when I've had to shrink the business and I feel like such a failure, right? I can send love to that part of me who has felt like a failure in the past, who has felt not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough. And I know exactly what age she is, what she struggles with. And she's the one that needs some tending at that moment. And the more I do that, the easier it is for me to see the opportunities in this new landscape. Wow, okay. This means I can grow my team in a lighter, brighter way. This means I can reinvent my business in a way where I don't have this, debilitating overhead. This means I can move faster with my creative ideas because I don't have so many layers of wonderful complexity. Right? But it's hard to see those things if we don't pause and really tend to those deep feelings. Yeah. And if we don't, I'll say one more thing. I had a couples therapist, so I have been engaged a few times, married once. But I remember when my previous almost marriage blew up and we were going to couples therapy and she's like, look, I don't know if you guys are going to last, but I'll tell you one thing. You're going to pick up in the next relationship where this one is leaving off. So you better do the work. And I was like, oh my God. Right. And so, but I'll never forget that because I think that is true of any blocks and barriers in our psyche, in our hearts, in our well-being. We pick up where we left off and we can spin out over and over and over again, or we can buckle up and do the work.
Oh, wow. That was so good. Because I think about in everything, in being, I'm not an athlete, but just for some reason, like the Olympians.
Yeah.
What they had to change in order to be an Olympian.
You are an athlete because I have seen you go for a big run at the crack of dawn. And I was like barely able to lift my head and have my sip of coffee. And you're coming back at like 5 a.m. after like running a marathon. You're like, hey.
Yeah. I was like, just ran, 12 kilometers.
See you in the room. I'm like, girl.
There. But okay, okay, wow. Let this all digest because I think about this in my marriage too. Some of the best advice that I've ever received in marriage is that you have to work on yourself more than anything else. We tend to put blame on things external when most of it happens inside. And so for me to be a better wife to Dan was the work had to happen here because we were both trying really, really hard. And now we're so good. But we can't come into those similar situations being the person that we were expecting different results. So we have to change in order to be better, to be a better service to our kids, our community, our friends. But that is so profound, even in business. So now it's like, I've been sued for wrongful dismissal. I've had to figure out how to pay the next paychecks. I've had to lay people off, like all the things you experience in business.
Yep.
Now, if and when I face those things again, drop in the bucket. I know what's going to happen. I know what's expected of me energetically, emotionally, because I would go back and I would try to understand why I felt the way I did and be the version of myself that I need to be in order to face these things again. Sometimes it's not pretty.
Yeah. But you know what I think when you talk about the version of yourself, and this is so important, I think for every single person, whether you're an entrepreneur or a patient, right, you make the best decisions from that place of centered, calm, whole, connected, heart-centered space. That's where you make the strongest decisions as a person, as a partner, as a leader. And from that place, I think we take less things personally, which is really hard to do. But the more you nurture that place inside of yourself, the easier it is to not only get through the difficult times, but not let the highs of business fuck with your ego. Can we swear on your show? I will change.
It's okay. I forgot to say that. We'll bleep that out.
You're so cute. No swearing.
Note taken. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It kind of like those highs in life, definitely feed the ego.
Well, they're great, right? But I always say to myself, especially with reviews, now I came from the world of acting. I got my first agent when I was 19. So I've been in front of the camera or on stage for a whole lot of years, over 30, I'm 53 on Saturday. So a whole lot of years. And I made a deal with myself a long time ago, which is if you're going to believe the good, which, hey, the good is great. That's wonderful. But if you're going to believe the good, you have to believe the bad. So how about you chart your own course and you really take care of how you feel about yourself and not how the rest of the world feels about you?
Yeah. I mean, that sounds lovely.
It's hard. But you know what I mean? But it's some of these principles you don't master, but you use them as, something you want to reach towards, right? You're always reaching towards that. So when you get the crappy review or, a customer is blowing up your customer service and they're not just annoyed because the link doesn't work, but they're saying, you're a sellout, because my link doesn't work. You can read all of the positive things and the way your products and services transform people's lives, but it's human nature to have that one really angry customer, kind of taking up rent in your head. And so I just offer that. It's never about us. It's always about whatever trauma or drama is going on in that person's life, and we are the projection of it.
We hold up mirrors to people.
We sure do.
Yep. And they hold up a ton of mirrors to me all the time. It's kind of like when I come down from those emotionally charged moments, I'm like, oh, like even last night we're at a barbecue. And I took so we have like a Lamborghini Urus, which is a nice SUV. And I parked close to the cottage. Everyone else was away. It was raining and it was like the only last available parking spot. And I put the key in the console thinking we're there for a quick minute to say hi for a couple hours and we're going to leave. Well, one of the kids wanted to see the inside of the car because it's a nice car. And my son asked me, can I show so-and-so the car? I was like, sure. And they go in and I forget about this. I forget that I gave them the ability to go in and they're playing in the car. They open the trunk. All this stuff happens. They come back in and they're all acting weird. And I was like, uh-oh. Mama, we locked the keys in the car. And I'm like, okay. We are 30 minutes away from home. So I call my dad. My parents are staying at the house. I said, Dad, can you go through all these bags, all these pockets, all these drawers to look for the spare key? And I might have to have you drive it up to me. Couldn't find the spare key. So I was really starting to get upset because the car was blocking other people's vehicle. And of course, I'm like, hey, God, what is the lesson in this? And so we called roadside assistance. The guy shows up and he's like, to be honest with you, I've never had to unlock a vehicle like this before. I'm like, oh, it's got to be easy. You just do the thing. So anyways, as I reflect back on those moments, how I let this thing take rent in my space for the evening that I should have been with my friends and family, just hanging out, having fun. He got the key out in 10 seconds. We were all so shocked. Now I know how to break into a car, by the way, because I saw all the little contraptions that they use. And I thought about that this morning, how I was like, I ruined the night for myself, allowing this to upset me. When I'm in a room with brilliant people, we would come up with a solution. Aww. And money's not the issue. However, the lesson in it from God was just like, so it is. And so it is. Who cares? And so no one got hurt. This is hilarious because now the chatter on the table was, why is it that all these high-end vehicles don't have apps? You can get an app to unlock your Honda Civic, but you can't have an app to unlock a Lamborghini. It's like they were all joking around about how these high-end cars are just impossible to like, first of all the doors lock with the keys in it. That doesn't make any sense. So then we went around the table and everybody was telling me their stories about something similar that happened. And theirs were way worse, way worse. Like one girl, same thing happened, but her child was in the car. Like I can't imagine. And Mama Bear had come out, I would have busted that window so fast. So when we're faced with these little obstacles, we let this adrenaline and the anger just take over the current situation. It was not worth me stressing about.
There's a section of the book that I talk about the both and. And so you can think about this in life. You can think about it in business. Oftentimes as people, we want the rainbow, but we say, hold the rain. And can you hold space for both? Can you be successful and struggling? Can you be vibrant and have stage 4 cancer? Yes, you can. So it's holding space for that, the magnificent gray, that both and. And I think that makes life, first of all, easier, but also really more interesting. A lot more interesting. And it makes us more resilient and able to hold space for all of it, as opposed to just a sliver of what you think is palatable, what you think success looks like. You know? And so we're just flexing these human muscles that we could apply to anything.
So powerful. We want the rainbow, but hold the rain.
Yeah.
We want the flowers, but hold the rain.
But hold the rain. And it's just not how things work. It's not how business works. It's not how relationships work.
Yeah.
I had another therapist who I actually write a lot about in this book. And she used to say the problem with relationships in your mind is, oh, the other person isn't me. If the other person was me, it would be very simple. They wouldn't do that stuff. You know? Yeah. It's like, yeah, the other person is not you. So how do we hold space for them too?
Yeah. So can you just send a memo to my husband that he needs to clean up after himself just a little bit more? I get that he's not me, but that would just be nice. No, and it's true. And going back to one thing we touched on, and just that we see somebody struggling through a situation that we wouldn't have the same reaction to. So we invalidate their feelings just by way of saying, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. The worst thing to say, because it is to them. We don't know what's going on in their head.
Yeah,
they're struggling.
It's true. It's really awkward times, awkward people. You know, when you're going through something really challenging, the worst thing to hear is stuff like that, or you know, everything happens for a reason. That to me that's a big red flag. Yeah. With healthy conversation and healthy relationship, partly because I think that can be misinterpreted as this is my fault. This is my karma. You know, if you've just lost somebody, everything happens for a reason, really. Or you're young, you'll have another baby. I wanted that baby. Why are you crying so much? It's only a dog. My dog was my child, right? So I don't think we say these things to be hurtful. We say these things because we don't know what to say when somebody's struggling. And so sometimes we put our foot in our mouth. Sometimes we may center ourselves and make it all about us. Oh, well, that happened to you. Let me tell you what happened to me. And then that person feels unseen. Or if you are in the coaching industry, you may come up with a whole bunch of advice that was never asked for, right? My husband will sometimes say, nobody paid you for that session. Yeah. Like, ferme la bouche. Nobody asked you. I know this is what you do for a living, but zip it. Zip it. You know? And so again, I talk about this a lot in the book too, because this is just par for the course. You know, the things that I have heard, especially when I was newly diagnosed, it was like, oh, wow, you have stage 4 cancer. How long do you have to live? Right. As if, you know, it's like you're slowing down and at the traffic accident, you know what I mean? Looking to see if you can see what's going on over there. Right? Yeah. It's human nature. We're curious, but it's not. Can be very harmful to the person. So you could, again, apply this any way you want it to, in any way you want to use it. But I think what's more useful instead is to actually listen and to understand. And this is where soothing the nervous system comes in, your nervous system, the person who doesn't know what to do and doesn't know what to say and doesn't know how to be supportive. You're a good person, but you're like, oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong. So maybe I'll just like ghost the person instead.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't want to get it wrong. And then that person feels sad. So what you do instead is you say to yourself, it's not my job to fix this. It's not my job to fix this. It is not my job to fix this. I cannot fix this. But what I can do is show up and be present and listen more than I talk.
Oh,
that is easy, but hard too.
So hard. So hard. Yeah. Dan and I have this new standard where if I start rambling, he'll stop me and he's like, now am I just listening or am I giving advice? I like that.
That's so smart. That's so smart because that's one of the things that I think can be really useful is saying, I can listen or I can brainstorm. Which version do you want?
Yep.
You know, and that's, I'm sure when you hear that, you feel relieved. You can choose which one you want.
Yeah. Yeah. The feeling is sometimes I'm like, shouldn't you just know what I want? I'm that angry. Read my mind. But like most often I'd say 90% of the time it's just listen. Like I'm going to ramble and I'm going to come up with my own conclusion. Just pretend to hear. And then sometimes when I get to the end, then I'll be like, actually, could you provide advice?
Oh, yeah.
So most of the time we just need to hear ourselves and we'll come full circle, hopefully at some point. But one of my really good friends was going through a gnarly season in her life. And we spent some time in Scottsdale. We went to this beautiful event and we were working out the first morning we were there. And she kept leaving and came back and she'd been crying and crying. And she's like, I just can't stop crying. I don't know why. Like, I'm like, that's okay. And I go, take my hand. We're going to go into a quiet place. This is the Scottsdale Camelback Resort. It's beautiful. They have a gorgeous spa. So I'm thinking the best place to go is the spa because it's so quiet where you're not supposed to talk. So anyways, I bring her in. We go to like this one room in the back and it's echoing in there and she's crying and I'm holding her hand and I'm trying to listen and it's just echoing everywhere. But I just sat there and I was just like, she's letting it out. She's crying. And yeah, I mean, all of this now, what you're saying is making sense to me because there was this incredible sense of responsibility to help solve the problem for her. And that was not why we were there at all. Yeah. And when I let that go, oh, wow, I was able to cry with her. Crazy. Because we were both going through these emotions. Holding space is the hardest thing to do, but the people that do it, oh man, they're the healers of the world, like yourself. Because you know it's not your responsibility to solve the problem. Or how do you say it again?
To fix it.
To fix it.
Yeah. And we all have that. And we all have those beautiful impulses to try to make things better for people because we're good. Yeah. You know, we're good inside. And so from that place of goodness, we want people to feel better. But I think the only way for somebody to truly feel better is to be in their own process and do the work for themselves. It doesn't mean we can't get help. We need support. We need each other. We need community. 100%. Everything changes with community. But ultimately, we're the ones that walk in the shoes. And I think your story is so powerful, but also for anybody out there listening who's feeling like as you're listening, a certain emotion is coming up or a certain experience is coming up for you. Maybe it's in business, maybe it's in relationship, maybe it's in your, connection to your passion or lack of passion. in this stage of your life. I think what it can be helpful is to understand that all of this stuff, emotions are energy, and energy needs to go someplace. Otherwise, it stagnates. And in that stagnation, a whole bunch of things can happen, including it can impact our well-being. But emotions are also information. And so if we get more curious about them, even the ones that are scary, then we find clues about how to tend to those emotions. And what I know to be true is on the other side of this work is an enormous amount of joy. And that can be the why. If somebody out there listening is like, well, why the hell would I do this? Why would I open that door? Because if I open that door, it'll be so big, I'll be swept out to sea. If you're listening and you have that feeling, you are already out at sea. This is your life preserver back to the shore.
Oh my God, that's so good. Emotions are information. Yeah. I feel so, wow, this has been like a healing conversation for myself. I love this. Okay, so last question for you, because we could chat forever. Well, actually, two last questions for you. Where can people go to get your book? And remind us what it's called.
So you can go anywhere books are sold, and it's called I'm Not a Morning Person with a U. Morning. Because I didn't want to be. But then I realized, oh, girl, you are missing out on a lot of goodness. You got to do this work.
It's funny that you brought up the story of me running in the morning. I told this to my mom yesterday, that there was this really funny like TikTok meme that went viral during the pandemic, where there's this woman drinking coffee on her front porch. She's like a stout woman. And there was runners going by at 7 a.m. And her reaction was like, where are you going? What are you running from? Are you okay? Like, yeah, I bet there's people that actually feel that way. Are you okay? Okay, so we'll go. I need to grab a copy of this book, because initially my thought was the morning of losing somebody you loved, but I realized it is so much more than that. So powerful. So the true last question for you is, when I ask you what it means to be a wild woman, what is that to you?
To be a wild woman, that's a really delicious question. It has meant different things at different points in my life. In different points of my life, it would be more of the obvious. I would say a wild woman is a very content woman, a woman who is happy in her skin, happy in her life, happy in her choices, happy with who she is, no matter what somebody thinks about it. She's just savoring life and content.
I love that. So, Kris, where can people go to find you online?
You can find me at kriscarr.com. And on Instagram, I am at Crazy Sexy Kris with a K.
And you are crazy sexy. We only welcome crazy sexy people onto this show.
Well, anyway. Wild women and crazy sexy people. I mean, come on. Boom.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Kris.
Thanks for having me, Renee.